Well, what do we got here? In the 1950s and 60s, these 10 cities were booming. Factories were full, downtowns were alive, and the streets were packed with people chasing the American dream. But today, most of that is gone. The factories are silent, the homes are empty, and in some of these cities, downtown looks more like a ghost town than it does a community. These are 10 cities that have lost over half of their population since their peak, with one simple rule. Each city factored in must have had at least 50,000 people at one point or another. Let's get to it. Really quick, I wanted to mention that if you're new here and if you've never heard of me before, I've actually made videos on some of the cities on this list. So towards the end, if you want to know more about one of these cities, I'll have links to those videos in the pinned comment. So make sure to check out some of those links. Thanks. Number 10 on this list is Hamtramck, Michigan.
Been there, done that.
The city saw a peak population of over 56,000 back in 1930. But that was a long time ago. In 2000, the city hit rock bottom at just over 22,000 people, a decline of 60.15%. That's a lot, isn't it? Beware, it only goes up from here. Since 2020, it's actually grown back a little bit, but it's starting to decline again. Anyway, Hamtramck is an interesting one. It incorporated as a village in 1901 and then again as a city in 1922 to avoid being annexed by Big Bad Detroit. As you can see, it's an enclave of the Motor City, with only a small stretch bordering another enclave, Highland Park. Hamtramck started out being fairly small. In 1910, it had only 3,500 residents or so, but by 1920, it grew to as many as 46,000, mostly due to the Dodge main factory that ended up employing as many as 36,000 people during the 1940s. With the jobs at the plant, Hamtramck became a center for the Polish immigrant community. The city has long been known for its punchkis, and to this day, people from all over Metro Detroit flock to Hamtramck on Fat Tuesday and justify eating like a pig by participating in the Punchki Day run. Just like with Motown, however, Hamtramck fell, and it fell hard. The Polish fled towards newer Detroit suburbs, and the Dodge main plant shut down in 1980 and it was demolished the next year. Today, General Motors has a plant in its place, but it doesn't employ 36,000. Try 4,000. Big difference. The city has also gone through a culture shift, as in 2013 it became the first Muslim-majority city in America, and between 2010 and 2020, the city grew by 6,000 before trending back towards a downward trend. Number 9.
Cleveland!
Oh yes, the mistake on the lake. The only thing worse than the Browns is the city of Cleveland itself. Cleveland grew to be among the country's largest cities early on due to its location off of Lake Erie. It provided for great shipping, and once railroads became a thing, Cleveland was set up to be one of the country's original industrial powerhouses. The economy thrived off of several industries, including steel, auto manufacturing, oil refining, chemicals, paints, and more. In the early 20th century, the manufacturing jobs brought hundreds of thousands of people to Cleveland. The city would rank as high as being the 5th largest city in the country in 1920. By 1950, Cleveland was home to just shy of 915,000 people. Today, that number is down to 356,000, good for a decline of 61%. But just like with many of these Rust Belt cities, the population fell starting in the 1950s and only accelerated in the 1970s when manufacturing took a hit everywhere in this country. Plus, it didn't help that the wealthier Cleveland residents fled towards the suburbs. But really, things aren't all that bad here. Despite the ongoing population loss for the city overall, downtown has seen a resurgence. Cleveland still has the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it's Kid Cudi's hometown, and they're not setting their river on fire anymore, so that's a good thing. By the way, about those river fires, yeah, thanks Cleveland for taking the hit for the rest of the nation. It led towards the creation of the EPA and all kinds of environmental protections, including the Clean Water Act. So yeah, thanks Cleveland for setting your river on fire so we didn't have to elsewhere. Appreciate it. Number 8 is Gary.
Been there, done that.
And when you see downtown, you might be surprised that it's not higher on this list. In fact, there's only a few other cities ahead of Gary on this list that have downtowns that look completely lifeless. While on the positive side, Gary gave us Michael Jackson, and his childhood home is kept up with very well to this day. The city often holds events to celebrate his life along with the rest of the Jackson family. Not all homes in Gary look as nice as the Jackson house, though. Gary was a late bloomer. Unlike other industrial giants in the Midwest, Gary wasn't founded until after 1900 when U.S. Steel decided to rip up the beautiful sand dunes that lined the southern tip of Lake Michigan and construct the largest steel mill in the world.
It's a massive plant, one of the biggest in the world.
With that came jobs, 35,000 of them to be exact, which in return helped Gary to have as many as 178,000 people living in it back in 1960. Today, though, there's only 66,000 that call Gary home, good for a decline of 62.57%. Gary was given the nickname of the City of the Century due to how rapidly it grew from the start. But since the only reason that Gary ever existed was because of U.S. Steel, when the demand for steel went down and the industry started to thrive overseas, Gary had absolutely no diversity for its economy, and the city went downhill fast. Crime rose, white flight occurred, there was city corruption, and everything just contributed towards this long trajectory of a downward spiral that the city still cannot find its way out of today. The one shining positive that stands out in Gary these days is the parts of the city that are actually a part of the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore, so at least some of the beautiful sand dunes are still left. Another shining positive is that there are 7 more cities ahead of Gary on this list. But if the city doesn't get its act together, it might only climb higher on this list as time goes on. Number 7. Youngstown, Ohio. Originally a small agricultural community, things changed once coal mining and iron foundries brought in thousands of jobs for immigrants. Following that was the steel industry, and by the 1920s, Youngstown was second to only Pittsburgh in national steel output. From 1900 to 1920, Youngstown saw its population triple, reaching a high of 170,000 back in 1930. The population stayed stagnant, however, until the 1960s, when things started to decline rapidly. From 1960 and on, Youngstown has seen a double-digit percentage loss every 10 years, or every time the census gets an official count. All of that has added up to be a total decrease of 65.2% of its peak population. Just like with many of the other cities on this list, Youngstown never diversified its economy, so once the industrial jobs went overseas in the 1970s, Youngstown was doomed. Number 6, Detroit, Michigan.
Been there, done that.
If you're new to this channel and you don't know me, this is my city. I have strong ancestral roots here, my ancestors helped build the Fox Theater, so yeah, I think that counts, right? Well, I live outside of the city but close to it, so anyway, there you go. Before Detroit went on to being this giant city, for a long time it was a larger, medium-sized city, if you catch my drift. It wasn't until the early 1900s when auto manufacturing took off here, thanks to Henry Ford inventing the assembly line. Detroit was home to several auto manufacturers that competed with one another, including brands that are easily recognized today such as Ford and General Motors. Back then, however, there were other car brands like Packard, Cadillac, Olds, Dodge, Hudson, Pontiac, Studebaker, and even more than that. Over time, many of these brands either merged into one large brand or disappeared altogether. The city hit its peak population in 1950 at 1.8 million, and it was the 4th largest city in the country after only Chicago, New York, and LA. In 2020, the population hit its lowest point at 639,000. That's a loss of over 1 million people, good for a percentage decrease of 65.5%. Anyway, they still make cars in Detroit and in the surrounding area, but the job counts at these factories are not near what they used to be. It's not just job loss, it's also segregation. White flight from the 60s and on diminished much of the tax base for the city. Corrupt politics, bad mayors who encouraged people to leave the city, bad mayors who stole taxpayer money from the city, and a consistent high crime rate throughout the years all played factors in people leaving Detroit. Most of them just moved out to the suburbs, though. I mean, the metro area is still home to nearly 4.5 million people. But it wasn't until recently, in the last 10 years, that there's been some notable positive changes in the city. Companies have moved their offices from the suburbs into downtown. The city built its first skyscraper of over 500 feet in 50 years. The Pistons moved back to downtown. The Michigan Central train station was redeveloped after being abandoned for 30 plus years. Plus, people have moved back into downtown and in the neighborhoods that surround downtown. I don't mean to sugarcoat things though, because there's still a ton of abandoned land in the city, and there's still many, many years of progress needed before a citywide change is made. Well, believe it or not, there's actually 5 other cities that are ahead of Detroit on this list. But before we get to it, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. If you don't, I'll make sure that the next list of the worst whatever will feature your hometown. Thanks.
Just do it!
Number 5 is St. Louis.
Been there, done that.
And no, people from St. Louis, the surrounding St. Louis County is not a part of your city. Only St. Louis City is a part of the city. That's just one of the things that people get upset about in the comments of some of my St. Louis videos is, oh, you're not talking about the good things about St. Louis, you're not including St. Louis County, and you're not talking about what makes this area good. No. St. Louis County is separate from St. Louis City. Get it straight, people. Come on. Look, St. Louis has been around for a long time. In 1870, St. Louis was the 4th largest city in the country. Only New York City, Philadelphia, and Brooklyn, New York, which eventually became a part of New York City, were more populated in 1970. Back then, St. Louis was thriving off of several industries, including the automotive industry, brewing, tobacco processing, flour milling, and even slaughtering. In 1890, there were over 6,000 factories in the city. The St. Louis area was also the location for a lot of involvement through the Manhattan Project, so if you're wondering why the arch glows at night, that's why. But no, really. St. Louis's decline is very similar to the other major cities that I've mentioned so far. In 1950, the population peaked at 856,000. Today, that number is down to 269,000, good for an overall decline of 68.57% of its peak. Fewer jobs in the factories starting in the 1970s, and segregation is to blame. The greater St. Louis area has a lot of areas that are doing just fine, to satisfy everyone who might get upset at St. Louis being on this list, but also there's a lot of areas in the greater St. Louis area that are not. But overall, the metro area isn't too bad. Although Forest Park continues to be lively, the city proper hasn't done itself much favors over the years. Truthfully, it'll take a lot more than maintaining a shiny arch to spark a real comeback. One of the biggest issues they've had is crime. As of recent years, St. Louis has been ranked as the most dangerous city in America, trading places in the number 1 spot on that list with Memphis and Baltimore. Number 4 is a place that many of you probably haven't heard of before, unless you're from Western PA. McKeesport is just southeast of Pittsburgh along the almighty Monongahela River, or as many locals like to pronounce it, the Mon River. Anyway, because I mentioned Pittsburgh, you can imagine that this place declined because of the steel industry. And if that's what you're imagining, then congratulations, you're smart. From 1899 to 1968, McKeesport was home to the National Tube Division of U.S. Steel. It was the largest steel tube manufacturer in the world. It's what helped McKeesport grow to a peak population of 55,000 in 1940. Today, however, the city is home to just 16,747, good for a decline of 69.7%. So just a few more hundred people and it will be an even 70%. Something that's interesting that sticks out to me so far in the video is that so far, U.S. Steel has played a role in 4 cities on this list, and there's still 3 more to go. Anyway, this just all goes to show you how detrimental it can be for a local economy to depend solely on one industry, let alone one company, no matter what or where it is. Number 3, staying in the great state of Pennsylvania, Johnstown, PA. What do you know? Another steel manufacturing town. Steel production begun in Johnstown back in 1852 through the Cambria Iron Company. Today, the steel industry is still in town, but it's at a much, much lower scale than what it used to be. The city peaked in 1920 at 67,000 residents, but today it's home to only 17,000, a decline of 73.7%. It's also important to note that Johnstown, being in the thick of Appalachia, is located along the Conemaugh River. Translation: Johnstown was built in a river valley surrounded by steep hills, which is a prime recipe for flooding. Which leads me to this. In 1889, a failure of a dam led towards the Great Flood of 1889, where the water rushed downstream at 40 miles per hour and caused mass destruction and many deaths. Because of this flood, Johnstown is nicknamed as the Flood City. Number 2 on this list is East St. Louis, Illinois.
Been there, done that.
East St. Louis had many of the same industries as St. Louis, Missouri did across the river. There was meat packing, steel making, coal mining, aluminum making, and several others. And being along the river, it became a major trading point for agricultural products throughout central Illinois as well. Plus, if you think about it, all of the railroads had to go through East St. Louis before they crossed the river west into St. Louis, so that made it a prime location for industry. But I feel like I've been repeating myself with every city on this list, because once again in the 1970s, industry took a huge hit. East St. Louis saw its population peak at 82,000 in 1950, but today it's down to 17,000, a decline of 79.2%. You can blame it on white flight, you can blame it on the decline of industrial manufacturing jobs, you can blame it on the crime. It's many things. East St. Louis was never able to modernize its economy, and with it being in the state of Illinois, well, that doesn't help either. For companies, it's much more affordable for them to set up shop in the St. Louis suburbs on the Missouri side than it is for them to operate on the Illinois side. For the residents, property taxes are much more reasonable on the Missouri side than they are on the Illinois side. And you're not really getting much extra by paying more for living in Illinois. Sorry, but it's true, especially for the Metro East region.
Bruh.
So what is the number 1 city on this list? What could it be? Highland Park, Michigan.
Been there, done that.
Back when Chrysler was its own company, Chrysler had its headquarters in this city. When they left for fancy schmancy Auburn Hills, it depleted the tax base for Highland Park even more. If you recall number 10 on this list being Hamtramck, I showed you this map. Well, right next to it is Highland Park, and it's been hit hard with a number of factors over the years, including white flight, crime, and deindustrialization. Highland Park was the location of Henry Ford's second assembly plant, and it's where a bunch of Model Ts were assembled back in the day. The building still stands today, but of course it's vacant. In 1930, Highland Park saw a peak population that was just shy of 53,000 people. Today it's home to only 8,000 people, a decline of 84.7%. Really, you can look at Highland Park as being another inner city neighborhood of Detroit, as they both have faced the same hardships. The only difference is that Highland Park doesn't receive the grant money that Detroit does to clean up the blight because, well, it's kind of easy to forget about Highland Park, honestly, and I think that's what's happened. It's kind of sad, and honestly, I don't think that Highland Park will be its own city for much longer. It might just get annexed by Detroit, but it also might not, because you gotta wonder, would Detroit even want to annex Highland Park? It'll be very interesting to see what happens to this city in the future. Well, there you have it. Those are 10 cities of over 50,000 people at one point in their history that have lost over half of their peak population, ranked in order. We'll see you in the next one. Peace!